Well, this was supposed to be out on Halloween. Fuck. Hey, hello. Welcome to another episode of Drawin Shit. My name is Sarah Allen Reed. I am a cartoonist and illustrator by trade, and this is my little web series where I show you all how to draw shit. Or more accurately, how I draw shit and how I fuck up a lot along the way. Speaking of which, I am so sorry this has taken this long. I have had a lot of equipment failures the past couple months. My hard drive went out, delaying what was supposed to be this episode. So I recorded this in the meantime, and then my sound card bit the dust. And on top of that, I've been busy with a lot of client work, as you can see here, as well as the release of the new Ophelia Drowning record, which you're hearing in the background right now. So thank you all for your patience. Let's get started. As always, we're going to start by taping up the paper here. I'm using Strathmore Comic Layout Bristol, as I normally tend to do for a lot of my larger pieces, and of course nearly all of the comics I draw these days. Now we're going to sharpen this pencil a bit with a bit of fine grit sandpaper and start doing our layout work. I decided to add a little bit of lettering along the top here. More specifically, a quote from the Swamp Thing TV series. Quick shout out to Craig Cermak for bringing that specific piece of inspiration to my attention. Twitter link is in the description below. If you're not already following him, go do so. So, once we've got the lettering guidelines as well as a nice frame for the image to sit in, we're going to go ahead and start sketching out our mossy boy. Swamp Thing is one of the few characters from mainstream comics that I have any kind of attachment to. Growing up, I didn't have access to comics. I was raised in a particularly oppressive, super Christian foster home. Pokemon was the devil, Yu-Gi-Oh was Satan, all that kind of thing, so of course I wasn't allowed to read comic books. But I always knew I wanted to be an illustrator. I knew I wanted to tell stories. And that, combined, meant I wanted to draw comics. But, obviously, I didn't have access to many comic books. For some reason, however, I did manage to get a hold of the trade paperback Secrets of the Swamp Thing, which is a compilation of the original 10-issue run by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson, repackaged by DC for the book fair market. Saw that shit at a book fair, somehow managed to grab it, and by the end of high school, the thing barely had an intact spine to it, because I read it so goddamn much. The character of the man who was once Alec Holland just stuck with me, for a lot of different reasons, and Len Wein's verbose, almost poetic writing, and Bernie Wrightson's symphonies of lines and ink continue to influence my work to this very day. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the story of the Swamp Thing follows one Dr. Alec Holland, scientist and guy with a dead wife by the end of issue 1 extraordinaire, as his lab and aforementioned wife kinda just explodes. And he finds himself transmogrified into the terrible Swamp Thing for some kind of science reasons, I guess. From there, it just goes on a cavalcade of crazy shit and a smorgasbord of, well, traditional weird tales kinds of subjects. He gets abducted by little goblin men commanded by a wizard of some kind. The wizard's daughter and the Holland's government handler have some kind of weird romance as they track Swamp Thing down through half the world. They end up in Salem for some fucking reason. There's werewolves at one point, and for some reason, fucking Batman the next. It's weird as hell. and incredibly fantastic throughout. Every character is handled perfectly, and the series as a whole is just heartfelt, touching, and downright memorable, primarily because of the author and illustrator. Unfortunately, Wayne and Wrightson only really worked together on the series up until about issue 10. But it's those 10 issues that I was reading as a kid, and those stuck with me more than anything else I've probably ever read in my professional career. Now, the quote we're framing the image with is actually something the Swamp Thing and I have in common: our love of plants. It's something a lot of artists tend to do. Oscar Wilde famously kept a vase of flowers on his writing desk to mask the smell of his oft-full ashtray, and many of my colleagues in the industry collect houseplants to brighten the studios that we often have to spend hours upon hours in. My own studio is covered in ivies, and if I were actually able to keep them alive for more than 10 fucking seconds, I'd probably cover it in flowers too. The scene from the Swamp Thing television adaptation we're working with. Swamp Thing tells a flower that it must be very lonely, being so beautiful and so solitary. Given the Green Friend's affinity for creating, controlling, and using plants to both prolong his own life and save the lives of others, as explored further in the Alan Moore and Mark Millar runs of the character, I thought it would be interesting. You construct the image with the Madonna and Child symbolism in mind. It's a fairly common religious motif which often features the two figures of the Madonna and Christ Child being adorned in nimbuses. I've included one of my favorite takes on the motive, Bouguereau's version of the lilies, in the comments below. While I'm not planning on drawing out the full iconographic halo in any traditional sense, I'm going to be highlighting our favorite green mossy boy and the hand he will be using to shelter the flower from the rain in the circular patterns on the darkened sky. Now, you may notice that I'm honing in on my pencils a lot more than I normally do. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to make sure that I nail down the anatomy and the mood of the scene to a much finer degree with this particular piece than I normally do with my comics or with other simpler subjects. I often tend to hone in on things like this with my pinups and other similar kinds of pieces where the emphasis falls upon a singular figure. I can't get away with my normal nonsense in cases like this where there's only a few things in the image to focus on. We're also going to be framing this in a very Art Deco way. While I'm not going to be leaning into the detail to the point where we're full-on channeling Alphonse Mucha, I at least want to put a more 1920s show poster spin on the joint. To that end, we're going to be extending the boundaries of the lettering around the frame in order to give it a look very similar to the types of fonts and framings that were used back in those days. I have a kind of a weird thing for early 1900s design sensibilities. You'll all be seeing a lot more of that as the series goes on. Now I'm alternating here between a 2B pencil and an eraser until I get the lettering and everything else exactly where I want them. While I'll probably continuously go over the lettering in pen like I normally do, I want to make damn sure everything fits where it's supposed to be. A few extra touches on the pencils to make sure that everything snaps together, and we're off to the races on inks. As usual, I'm starting with my Zebra Pocket disposable brush pen, and we're going to be using a French curve to make sure that the edges on the frame are as on point as possible. And then we're going to switch over to my normal heavy hitters, the Pentel Pigment Brush Pen and Pocket Brush Pen,
for blacking out the proverbial sun and a lot of the larger details. As always, if you're curious what I'm using, links to purchase my particular accoutrement of implements. That's not how words work. It's in the description below. Go check it out. The majority of the process from this point, now that we've gotten the pencils mostly ironed in, involves a lot of switching back and forth between my usual 3 weapons. The aforementioned brush pen, pocket brush pen, and disposable brush pen, which I use for large swaths of ink, even larger swaths of ink, and hatching, respectively. And a lot of what we're going to be doing is using the latter to really build up texture on every conceivable surface on the Swamp Thing's body. Algae, moss, that kind of thing tends to be very textured. And I really want to make sure that when we're working through this, we're making a point to not just gloss over that texture, but to make sure that it's very visible and that it stands out, to emphasize the grimy nature of the character and the places he often finds himself. Now, I think it's about time for me to take a quick break. Let me get a little bit more of these hatchings in. There we go. Nope, a little bit more. There we go. I'm gonna go make some coffee. Here's a really stupid commercial. Enjoy. Alrighty. Got myself some coffee. Had to wet the old talking whistle for a minute. And now we're back with a bit more hatching, outlining, and that kind of sort of thing. Like I mentioned, pretty much what we're doing at this point is going back and forth between our 3 main implements. We're going to be using the 2 heavy hitters to black out portions that I want to remain in shadow. We're going to be outlining parts of the image that we really want to stand out. And we're also going to be using the disposable zebra brush pen for a lot, and I mean a lot, of fucking hatching. The majority of what we're going to be doing hatching-wise is going to be coming up, and I'm going to be making a lot of quick cuts. So you won't get to see most of it. Just know that there's about, 2-3 days of work worth of hatching just between all of the cuts you're seeing. You'll probably be able to tell because we're going to switch back and forth between night and day a couple times, and you're going to be able to tell thanks to the lighting in the studio. Now, you may be wondering, I did mention that we're going with the Madonna and Child motif. And
sunflowers don't grow in swamps. In fact, this is the Halloween episode, they aren't exactly blooming this time of year at all. Most people don't associate them with the harvest season. They're associated with summer. So why did I make the Christ stand-in this Mother Mary and Baby Jesus motif a sunflower? As with most of my pieces that deal with flowers, I am tapping into floral symbolism here. Sunflowers are often associated with things like happiness, optimism, and peace, something the Swamp Thing canonically doesn't get too terribly much of, causing him to cling to and cradle what little he does get to have. Framing this with the symbolism of the Madonna and Child, as we mentioned, the Christ Child often symbolizing humanity's hope and God the Father's joy, according to Christian tradition. It just adds another layer of meaning to the symbolism of the image. Finally, I just kinda liked the additional double entendre that's present with the sunflower. Plants often can't grow without sunlight, and as you'll see in the final piece, there just isn't that much sun where the man who was once Alec Holland is standing right now. He's gotta cling to what he has. And that's the important thing, and that's really all we can ever do. And on that note, I'd like to do my usual thing and take the time to remind you, as usual, that no matter where you are in life, there's always going to be the morning sun. I know that sometimes in life it can feel like you're trudging through the muck and the darkness, just holding on to what little hope you have, that a bit of light will shine through and make your journey so far worth living. And I'm here to tell you that the morning will come, and I know you can make it through to see the light. Until it does, however, like Swamp Thing here, take care of what little hope you have, and take care of yourself, because you're worth taking care of. And even if no one else does, I believe in you. Keep holding on, friend. You can make it through. Now that we've gotten the piece to a reasonable-ish level of completion, it's time to appease my ADHD and work on something a little different for variety's sake. More namely, the lettering. As per usual, I fully intend to black out as much of the fucking page as we possibly can. And so in between bouts of hatching and shading our mossy green friend and his sunflower baby child here, I'm going to be taking the time to alternate between using a Micron 08 to outline the letters and using my Pentel Pocket Brush Pen to just utterly nuke the background of the lettering. We're going to come back to that. It's not going to stay completely black for the entire time, but right now, I need a distraction from the hatching, and I want to take a black fucking ink pen or something. Sometimes you just get in those moods. Especially when you're alternating between all this hatching. I think before I edited all of this footage down, it was around 5.5 hours of just me doing this. And a lot of it. So no, I was not fucking joking. When I said there was gonna be a lot of hatching. But it's at the very least almost to a point of structural integrity now. We've gotten a good portion of the texture and shading down, and now it's time to put in even more work in the background. You might have noticed that I shaded in a good portion of the sky already, and a good portion of the leaves and all of those kinds of things, even grabbing my white ink pen and drawing a couple leaves down at the bottom there. I did say I was intending to not go with a full-on just nimbus. I wasn't going to completely lean into that iconographical imagery. But you know what? I kind of lied. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking our, there it is, disposable pocket brush pen. And here in a second, we're going to be going in and just putting a bunch of fucking emphasis lines all around that little moon there. As you can see, it's a bit tight on the hand side of things, but we have plenty of room to do it with old Swamp Thing. So we're just going to go ahead and take care of that and really just hammer in the symbolism directly over the head. And after we do that, it's time to go right back to the lettering. As I've mentioned before, we're going for a very Art Deco sensibility to this particular piece, and so I wanted the lettering to have a particularly high crossbar. The crossbar, in typographical terms, is the middle line that connects certain parts of letters like A and H. So we raise that to give it a bit more of a Art Deco feel to the lettering. The line that connects the A, in the middle, and the H in the middle are going to be a little bit higher than they normally would be, just to give it that real 1920s fucking feel. So we're going to go ahead and also just expand the border of the image just a tiny bit, just to give me a bit more room to play with. But at this point, we're coming to a pretty fine point to things, and there's not much else to do at this point, other than take out our old friend, our giant pot of white ink. I'm using Kuretake Zig 30 here to drum up a bit of a rainstorm and add some highlights to give a bit of a glass feel to the main image here. We're also going to be adding some raindrops falling on our old friend's head, as well as some raindrops falling on his hands and his arms and just about all over the goddamn place. Rain, 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 fuck electrolytes. We've got what plants crave right fucking here. Now, I don't have too much more commentary to add right this second, so I'm just going to let you enjoy a little bit of the new Ophelia Drowning record. And if you like the music you've been hearing in this episode, the link's down there in the description. Feel free to go snag a copy and enjoy the album. Now, I did say that we were going to be adding a bit more white ink to the lettering specifically, And this is about when I decided to go fucking overboard with it. We're gonna add a few geometric shapes and lines to really hammer in that Art Deco framing that we're going for. And then I just decided to go ham with the white ink. I think that about calls it. One swampy thing for your winter and fall season. Hello, Polly. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of Drawin Shit. Links to support the channel via Patreon, links to pick up the record you heard in this episode, and links to go annoy me on social media are on the screen right now, and also in the description of the video. As always, you're amazing, and don't let anybody tell you that you're not. Have a good one.